All right, fellow patriots, welcome back to another Friday Mental Jujitsu. My name is Michael Buell, and I will be your sensei this evening. Hiya! Happy 4th of July, everybody. Let's get to it. What we were advertised, what we got. We were advertised multiculturalism. What we got was destructionism. We were offered, and this isn't a joke, I'm not pretending, hot Latinas. We were told we were going to get smoking hot brown women from around the world. And that's what we were told. I'm not pretending. Of spicy food, of course. We're going to get exotic food, spicy food, Chinese buffets, right? That's what we were told. When we appreciate that. Thank you. Cheap labor, of course, America has a history of slavery. The world has a history of slavery. So cheap labor is some kind of form of slavery. We were told we were going to get the cream of the crop, right? All these things we were told. This is what we got. We got people who hate us. We got people who even though we give them free housing, free food, free medical, free education, they still hate us. They showed it to you on the streets just a few weeks ago, a week ago. No gratitude, no thanks, no waving the American flag, nothing. No desire to assimilate. And they want us to change. I always tell the story of me taking my kids to elementary school and they did the turkey trot. First year I took them to this particular school. The next year it's called the fall run. And I said, well, what happened to calling it turkey trot? Well, somebody moved to this country, was offended by it because I guess it's a religious holiday, but other than the 4th of July, it's the most American holiday. And we had to change it. And we did. Instead of telling them to stick it, we changed it. But if you're going to change one thing, then you'll change two things. It's a three, four, five. You're losing your country to people who hate you. All right, guys, low quality people. We were promised doctors, lawyers, and engineers. And we got drug cartels, violent gangs, and recently released felons. We got the low quality people that they pushed out of their countries. They didn't want them there because they were a burden. And now they're our burden. It's ridiculous. And we've got no-go zones, especially Europe. Europe's got they got different laws happening over there in Europe. That is ridiculous. But what happens in Europe is going to come here. It's going to happen here. So we got no-go zones. But this is what upsets me. The United States passed the 1968 Fair Housing Act, which said you couldn't discriminate. They use the word discriminate, but discriminate against race, religion, sexual orientation, whatever. So here's my point. I live in a town, 90% white, farmers, ranchers, blue collar. I can't sell my house to somebody that just fits into the community nicely like that. I find somebody from this community who wants to buy my property, or somebody that lives on a farm somewhere else. Yeah, I can't purposely seek out people that'll blend into the community and make it a nice fit. But the government can then take 1,000 Somali single military aged men and drop them into Minnesota in a small town. 1,000,000 of them, just drop them off wherever they want. Change your country, your community entirely. So yeah, we're restricted by this law to keep our communities similar, but they're being dropped off in packs and keeping their communities similar and pushing everybody else out because they're so aggressive about it. Yeah, and we got to leave our communities open. You got to see people walking around that aren't from here. You hear them talking, the way they dress, act, look. They're not from here, but they're unvetted, military-aged men that the government knows they're here. We've been invaded by the Trojan horse army. There are soldiers, saboteurs, and hackers in your community, just walking around freely, waiting for the dial-up, the call, Red Dawn, go, go, go. Any crime committed against an American by somebody who snuck in the country that you're not allowed to, the police can't just go ask them for their papers because that'd be Nazi Germany, right? That'd be racism. So you can't just go walk up on them. So every crime committed against an American by them, it's 100% increase. So no crime. And then they came into the country and committed a crime. That's 100% increase, right? But now multiply that by a gazillion. That's what's happening all over the country. You've been in, instead of all this, you've got hostile people that are hostile towards your race. They're hostile towards your freedom of religion, your family values, your American culture. They're hostile toward our American culture, and we have to just let them in. So the questions. What percentage of multiculturalism are we shooting for it? So when they started this multiculturalism, nobody ever threw out a number. So if America So I'll get to it. So yeah, so nobody giving us a number. When do we stop multiculturalism? So in 1776, when America was founded, it was 100% white, right? You know that if there were slaves, they weren't considered Americans. If the Indians were being genocided, they weren't considered Americans. If the Mexicans were having their land stolen from them, they weren't. Or that's what they say. I don't, I don't know. You lost a war, you sold it, but they feel like it's been stolen. They want it back. Well, anyways, they clearly weren't considered Americans. So 100% were Americans were white. By the time the slaves were emancipated in 1865, that made it 90%. They say like 10% were slaves in America. That's a lot. I didn't know that. That's hard to believe. But okay, so in 1865, it's still a 90% white country. By 1965, they did something called, and our numbers, the white people's numbers, were 85%, but they did this Immigration Act of 1965 where they stopped only bringing people in from Western Europe. They opened the borders up to anybody and everybody. So in 1865, at 85% white, that's when the Immigration Act started. 60 years later, by 2025, the white population, we are told on the Google machine, is 57%. You have lost your country. Okay? But here's the problem. You've lost your country to people who have an eternal beef with you. You enslaved the blacks, you genocided the Indians, you stole the Mexican land, right? So you're going to become a minority. People have eternal beef with you. Let me just before I get to this, yeah, number 4. Hold up. So this number of 57%, right? That's our current number, 50%, 7%. But that includes Iraqis that have moved to the United States. That includes Pakistanis. These aren't Anglo-Saxon, the American whites that built America. This is a new, different. I don't consider them white, but the census considers them white. So that 50%, 7% is Iraqis, is with Pakistanis. Was that a racial slur? Hispanics are counted. People from India are counted as white on the census. So how many Indians do you have in your community? Do you really believe white people, Anglo-Saxon people, are 57%? No. Okay, but Michael, well, why does that matter? I don't see color. Blah blah blah. Oh, it matters. It matters. What happens when you become a minority to people who have an eternal beef with you? Well, okay, ask the Hutus. The Hutus were an African tribe that enslaved the Tutsis. After the Tutsis, they changed some rules and let Tutsis run for office, let Tutsis be in the military, let Tutsis become police officers. The Tutsis realized, hey, we got the power now. So they macheted 1 million Hutus, ran up on them and chopped them to death. Yazidis are people that live in the Middle East that are surrounded by Muslims. They worship God, Allah, Jesus, Muhammad. But they have one caveat. They don't think Lucifer that brought the light, something isn't as bad as they say he is. He isn't the devil. So the Muslims consider them devil worshippers, and they literally hunt them down, kill the men, take the women as sex slaves. Look this up. Yazidis. This is what happens when you become a minority to people who have beef with you. Ask a Rhodesian. Oh, you can't because they've all been slaughtered. An entire genocide occurred and nobody's allowed to talk about it. So these people, once upon a time, built a first world country in Africa. The Bush people came in and said, hey, can we live with you? They said, no, you can do the jobs we don't want to do, right? But you don't get to vote, you don't get to marry our women, you don't get to be a part of the society, but you can do slave labor, you do cheap labor. So some came out of the bush and agreed, and others stayed in them. But eventually their numbers grew and grew and grew and grew. And then the communists came in and said, hey, man, this is your continent. Hey, man, one vote. So overnight, it went from white rule to black communist rule, and they were slaughtered. Every one of them was slaughtered because they had beef. They had beef with them. They didn't like the way you treated them. So this is what's going to happen. This is what is happening, guys. So this is the outcome. This is where we're headed. You're going to have to make a choice. This is your choice. You're going to live with the communists, or you're going to live with the, yeah, we got the third world communist, Islamic, left wing lunatics. So the communists are going to have the West Coast, the Islamics are going to have the Northeast. The left wing lunatics, they like dangly things, so they're going to take over the dangly areas. And then third worlders, they're going to be a border between everybody by the third worlders because communists and Islam can't get along. Islam and left wing lunatics definitely can't get along. Left wing lunatics and commies, they can kind of get along. There'll be some strongholds. There'll be some strongholds. But look, they're going to leave some of you farmers. They're going to let some of you white farmers stay here. But just remember, that's what the Greeks did. The Greeks were a warrior people, invaded foreign lands, conquered their men, brought the men back to be their servants, to be their slaves, to farm for them. They didn't want to farm, so they just got people they called the helots. They were owned by the state. You will be owned by the state. The only way to stop this, people, is if you resist and assist. I'm out.